Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. My name is Jesse and I am an employment and retention specialist. Today we are going to talk about tools for executive functions, and I'm just going to give my top 10 here. Tools for executive functions. I know that's kind of cliche, just doing 10, but be as it will, everyone has a top 10, so I figure it's about time that I have my own. So with that, let's get to some housekeeping. So housekeeping. This is going to be a longer presentation because it's going to have 10 different tools in it. So I'm going to be putting navigation links in the video description below so that you can navigate to your favorite tool or a tool that you want to learn a little bit more information about, or maybe it's something, one of the executive functions that you have a challenge with and you want to get some information on that. So feel free to click those links in the video description. So what exactly are executive functions? Well, they're a set of cognitive processes that help us to self-regulate, enable us to plan, prioritize, sustain attention, and basically go after long-term goals effectively. They're located at the front part of the brain, also known as the frontal cortex. And they're called executive functions because they're comparable to how an executive team would guide an organization to achieve its goals. Generally speaking, it has a tendency to manifest more in persons who are neurodivergent, so people with ADHD, epilepsy, brain injuries, autism, etc. The list goes on. But it can impact normal people. In fact, many of the tools that we're going to talk about today are everyday tools that a lot of people use. So people even use these tools that don't have executive function issues. And some of them are professional tools used every day by certain professions to help with planning and prioritizing. So in many ways, you could say that this is an executive functions workshop. You can also say it's an organizational, well, there's more than organizational tools in here, but many of them are organizational based type tools. In either case, this is going to be a great list of tools that are going to help you in the workplace. So there is quite a number of executive functions. So these can include things like working memory, shifting attention. That would be from moving from this task to this task and then moving back. It can also include response inhibition, basically the ability to not react to something. Delayed gratification, cognitive flexibility. We might call this adaptability. So how easy is it for a person to change from one thing to another? Self-monitoring, emotional regulation, time management, planning, organizing, attention control, and goal-directed persistence. So that's quite a list right there. But I'm going to break that down into several key categories that impact work. So generally speaking, executive functions will impact things like goal management, task management, time management, attention management, emotion management, and energy management. So we're going to be going down that particular format. There are some of these tools that sort of overlap on multiple of them. So certain ones may be in task management and attention management, or emotion management and time management, and so forth. So I don't want you to get too hung up on what category they fit into. It's more whether or not that they help you achieve particular goals and so forth. So that's the main emphasis here. So we'll start with goal or scope management, depending if you're using business vernacular. And there's one really good tool. It's tried, tested, and true, and it's called a SMART goal, and it stands for specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. And basically what it's saying is specific. Like, is this goal, something that is very clear, like we know we've achieved it, right? Or is it something that kind of, we don't really know if we've gotten there or not? So specific, measurable, is there a way for me to track progress towards it? Actionable, is this something that is doable? Is it something that I can do, or does it require something from someone else? Is it something that's realistic? Relevant, is it something that pertains to maybe an overall bigger goal? If I'm looking to get into a job, for example, or get into a career, that might be my overall goal. So the question is does my SMART goal help me get to that direction, right? And then you got time bound, right, or timely, depending on on how you want to put it. But basically, is there a deadline to it, and so forth. So I spoke a little bit about jobs and goals and stuff. So here, let's take a look at some of these statements, and we'll see which of these are SMART goals. So to get my dream nursing job, is that a SMART goal? Well, it's specific. We've talked about a nursing job. Okay. Is it measurable? Sure, you either have it or you don't. That's pretty straightforward. Is it actionable? No, because it requires someone else to give you the job, right? Is it relevant? Sure. Is it time bound? No, there's no reference to time here. So it is not a SMART goal, but it's the start of something. It's the start of something. And next we've got submit an updated resume to 3 employers in the healthcare field by the end of the week. It's much closer. I would be a little bit more comfortable if it included the nursing job in it, but that's getting pretty close. Submitted 3 resumes. Is it specific? Yes. Is it measurable? Yes. I either know I've submitted 3 or I haven't. Is it actionable? Yes, because you can apply for those roles. I'm assuming the person who's writing this has the ability to do so. That seems pretty straightforward to me. Is it relevant? Yes, they're trying to go for a job in nursing, so yeah. And then is it timely? Yes, they've also declared that it's going to be at the end of the week. But so to improve that, I would probably just include applying for nursing roles in addition to what's there. But that is by definition a SMART goal. Number 3 is submit my resume to a bunch of different jobs ASAP. Well, I guess ASAP is timely, but again, lacking. Is it specific? No, I have no idea what jobs are being applied for. So at the end of the day, number 2 would be a SMART goal. Number 1 and 3 aren't. Next is the work breakdown structure, and this goes under time management. So this is actually a very well-known, very often used tool in project planning for task management and so forth. And it's the idea of breaking things down, projects, from big concepts into much smaller steps. Think of building a website, for example. You've got a planning phase, and then you have a design phase. So you want to know, what's the overall objective? What are some of the requirements of this website? And then when you go to the design phase, you want to look at things like mock-ups, reviewing designs. Then you're going to have some sort of building phase after, some sort of testing phase after, assumably. So this gives you just an idea of, you break down phases, and then you break them down into tasks. And you could even break these down into subtasks, like gathering requirements. Like, who do you gather the requirements from? The person who's going to use it. You can gather some requirements from the funder, so you can, the person who the website's for, you can break that down even further. So another example, we'll just run through an example here of a work breakdown structure. So someone's been asked to create an office employee picnic. So you're going to want to start to create a work breakdown structure. So you're going to start off with a task and then subtasks. So, for the employee picnic, you might want to have some entertainment there, some food. So you might want to schedule, create a schedule, decide on some games, decide on, what supplies do you need for these games? So these can fit into different subtasks and so forth. Food, you want menu. Where are you going to buy these items? How are these items going to get cooked? From there, you might want to decide what tools you're going to use. Do you want to use a grill and all that sort of stuff? But it's basically just breaking things down in a sequential order so that you can see the whole thing and know what you need and stay organized. Next, let's talk about meetings and meeting notes, because sometimes what can happen when it comes to things like task management is people go for a meeting, they write down all kinds of notes, or some people don't write down any notes, and then they have no idea what was agreed to, or they can say what was agreed to, they don't actually know. And then there's those that write down everything, and they got 15 pages of notes, and then you go, okay, so what are the next steps? And they go, I don't know. And then they start scrolling through all these notes, because it's a transcript of the meeting, and you just don't have any of the stuff in there. So this is what we call the quad method. We use this at Works for You. And we use this to help break down, things like decisions and who does what and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to run through an example here for you. So, we had a Works for You content meeting to decide the planning of this particular video. And it was on June 26th, and it was between the Works for You team. And we discussed a bunch of different things. So we talked about the production goal, of the training video. We talked about, what we would put on there, in terms of calendar tips and distraction reduction strategies and all that sort of stuff. Our notes are far more extensive than this. We decided we would try to have it up and running by next Friday, which I think was ambitious, but I don't know. We'll see if that gets edited out or not. My complaining and such. But we talked about different decisions and stuff that we were going to do. So did we want to put timestamps in the video so that people could navigate to different spots, right? And then we created a set of to-do lists. So the bottom quadrant, personal to-do lists. This was to-do lists for me. So this was stuff that I had to do. So I had to go record these videos in bite-sized segments with clear different transitions and turn this over by Monday. And then other to-do lists, so David would take a look at texts and other stuff in the graphics and that, and put all that jazz together. And then Ken would upload the video with the team, and the team would review all the stuff and do a final cut by Wednesday and all that stuff. So we kind of threw this together, who was going to do what and so forth. But the quad method is pretty straightforward. You have the general notes in the top left corner. Then you have key insights and questions, so things that we kind of hadn't really figured out or things that we needed more information on. And then at the bottom, we split up the to-dos. So anyone who takes a look at this can instantly see what I'm responsible for, what the team's responsible for, what were the major decisions, and what are sort of the stuff that we were unclear on. So that's the quad method for taking notes in a nutshell. Now, to contrast that with general meeting notes, if you're taking notes specifically for professional development and that sort of stuff, you can structure it a little bit differently. So you can do in the top left corner key concepts and then supporting details on the right, and then below you can put things like questions and things to research and clarifications and stuff like that. And then you can also include personal connections and mnemonics. And that's actually building off of another video that we created, which was on memory accommodations. And the idea is that if you're going to learn something, this is a strategy for doing it, is to create either mnemonics or what we call deep processing, which is to reflect on the content on how it impacts us personally. So again, this is another method for taking notes. If you're taking these notes for the sake of learning something, like if you're taking a class or professional development. Next, we're going to talk about power lists. Now, everyone has to-do lists, checklists, to-do lists, whatever, lists of things that need to be done. But here's the challenge with that is that you have lists upon lists upon lists of things that you need to get done. These lists can be very long, they can be very short, and all that, and it becomes quite burdensome. So the idea behind the power list is not to have everything in front of you all at once. So it's just a system, and there's other systems that are like this. An example of this is Scrum from project management. But the idea here is you maintain a master backlog list, and these are things that you have to do, but they don't need to be done this week, and they don't need to be done today. From that list, you generate what is called a weekly to-do list. In project management, we would call this a sprint. And from that, you then create what is called a power list, and that is items that you want to get done today. And you don't want to have more than 3 to 5 items per day, unless they're like really small things. But generally speaking, you want to have a list of things that are manageable to do today. And overall, your weekly to-do list shouldn't have more than, say, 15 items, give or take. I know this doesn't lend well to every type of job that's out there, but ultimately the idea here is you want to take on things that are bite-sized, but you also don't want to have the overall stress of staring at this massive backlog. You want to just take a look at what you're working on, what you need to achieve today, and what you need to achieve for the week. And it just helps you organize and plan your week. I do this all the time with things like my inbox, for example. I have a system called Inbox Zero. I manage it a little differently in the sense that I have an immediate action list, and then I have an action list, and then I have a follow-up list, and then I have a reading list. So even for me, I don't want to look at anything that isn't imminent. And then when that's done, I can look at things that I still have to get done. Or, I'll take a look at that list. If I'm doing similar things, I'll do them all in one group, and that way I save a lot of time. But the essence of the idea here is you want to only focus on what you need to focus on today. You don't want to go through all that. And that can get quite distracting. So once a week, go through your backlog, load up your items from your backlog to your weekly to-do list. And then every day, especially if you have it scheduled already, you can plan out your week and your day. With that, let's talk about time management. How's that for a segue? We just talked about planning out weeks. Now let's talk about time management. So just some principles around time management, because a lot of people get stressed out about time management because they're like, okay, oh no, if I put it in my calendar, I got to do it. Well, a few principles about time management. Your calendar is a tool. It's not a commitment. It's basically there to help you organize your time. So appointments are commitments, deadlines are commitments, but just because you put something in the calendar that isn't one of those doesn't make it a commitment. Okay, so that's important to note. One other strategy would be to keep one calendar, or if you have multiple calendars, and an example here is the graphic where it's got May 5th on there, where you can see my personal calendar and my work calendar is registered as busy. So even my personal calendar has a redacted look at my work calendar. And the reason that I do it that way is I don't want to schedule something for myself and then find I had a really important business appointment on that day. So I want to make sure that my calendar is pretty straightforward. And even on that calendar, I've got kids, after school routine, so even on my calendar, I'm keeping track of what my kids are doing, and sort of stuff. But you want to have your one calendar all in one place so that you can take a look at it and then you avoid things like double booking and all that. Less is more. So if you plan less, I can tell you as part of work, I've never not spent a day where I've been busy from beginning to end, because there's always something more to do. But if you schedule, a few of the important things and chunk it out, that will help you get more done. And, then you'll have some time for some of these other things that just pop up that you weren't expecting. Another thing to remember about tasks in terms of, and it doesn't matter what it is, it can be a work task, it can be a personal task, it can be, making dinner. You will always have three phases. You'll always have the setup phase, the work phase, and then the cleanup phase. So, when I come in the morning, the very first thing I do is I turn on my laptop, I take a look at, my emails and get myself set for the day. So I'm setting things up for the day. That will happen every single time. And then at the end of the day, I'm, either responding to emails or sending out, follow-up stuff or closing out for the day. So it doesn't matter what activity you're doing, you're always going to have some sort of setup time, some actual performance time, and then some cleanup time. You will always have that. So it's not a bad idea, when you're creating your schedule, to have those things in mind, that there will always be those three phases. So I never book anything for 9 o'clock in the morning. You can't get a 9 o'clock appointment with me in the morning because I'm setting up work. You might be able to get a 9:30 appointment out of me, but if you really push hard enough. But you will never get a 9 because I'm always setting up work. Likewise, you will never get a 4:30 appointment with me. Why? Because I'm closing out work for the day. So these are just some things to bear in mind when you're developing a schedule. So a really good tool to help out with this is called time blocking. And this is another tool. It's actually called a visual time map. And what it is, and here I've got Monday to Friday. So I've got your, I couldn't fit all 7 days on here. Full disclosure. I guess I could have no, I don't think I could have. Anyway, basically it's a chart on an hourly basis, and you could do this for half-hour intervals as well, of what your day looks like. So, and I would even encourage color coding it so you can see, okay, so I'm going to be traveling to work, for an hour from 8 to 9. I'm always going to be traveling during that period. 7 a.m. I got to have some sort of breakfast. I could break that down further and do 7:30 would be breakfast. I get up at 7 something or other. So you can break this down even further, but it's just a way of representing what things you do on a daily basis, and you just put this out so that you can see what your average week looks like. And you can do this on Google Calendar as well. You can call it time blocking, or time blocking. And that's basically where you block off certain times for specific activities. So I always know that I'm going to be working between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'm always going to have lunch at around noon, so I know that my work tasks need to fit all within that period, or I need to do some reorganization so that they do fit in within that time period. I know I'm always going to go for dinner around 7 o'clock-ish, sort of deal, so it's just ways of planning out. Now, it's not to say that you can't change that around, but it's just to give you an idea, especially if you've got a calendar that's all over the map. So here's an example of one when I was in school, and then I also worked in the evenings at the company I was working for at the time was Loblaws. So I would have to map out my schedule. Now, of course, I wasn't fully in class all that time because I was in college, but I had to map out when I was working, versus when I was, at school and stuff like that. So, it just gives you some ideas on how to plan things out. Now, it gets even more complex if maybe you don't have, you don't do school on Thursday and you can work that extra day, so you change this around as needed. But the idea here is so that you can visually see how your week plays out. Next is attention management. So the goal of attention management is to reduce distractions and increase focus. Now, you do this by reducing distractions by organization. And that can be organizing time, notifications, emails, anything that would vie for your attention. And you do that by determining what is urgent and what is important. Which brings us to this wonderful tool called the priority matrix. Now, this is actually a tool that was invented by Eisenhower back in World War II. And he used this as part of being a military leader, and he also became president of the United States. So while he was in management and so forth, he divided tasks into one of 4 categories. So either it was important and urgent, which things were demanding attention, and they generally demand attention because they're important to other people, right? And then there's things that are important but not urgent, things like our dreams, and these are things that don't have immediate consequences, so they often get backburnered. Then there are things that are urgent but not important, and these are things that don't matter in the long run, and they take up all kinds of attention. They waste your time. And then there's things that aren't important and not urgent. So let's go over some examples, and maybe that will help illustrate this further. So things that are not important and not urgent, such as me playing with the colors of this PowerPoint for the umpteenth time, especially because it's not my job. We'll see. I'm gonna bother David to put Slacker in that list. We'll see if he puts it in. Anyway, things that aren't important and not urgent. It's things like playing around with the design. Design is important, but not when you already have a format in that. Things that are urgent and not important might include things like sales. Did you really need that item? Or social media. oh man, I'm not going to know what certain celebrity thinks about another celebrity if I don't click on that. Okay, and then you go into a rabbit hole and you've been staring at social media all day and you haven't gotten anything done. So it demands attention, right? It's urgent, but it doesn't really contribute to anything. It doesn't move things forward. So these are things that are good to try and reduce or get rid of if you can, right? Things that are urgent and important might include things like health. It might be demands from your boss, so things at work, you know. But where you really want to focus your time is the important but not urgent. So things like study, things like education, things like meditation for mental health and stuff. Focusing on your career, right? Maybe you want to learn how to play an instrument or something along that line. So personal hobbies, right? Things that you've always wanted to do, your dreams and stuff. These are things that are important to you, but they're not urgent. And the problem with them not being urgent is they might get backburnered and backburnered and backburnered and backburnered, and you'll never get to them. So an important thing to do is to schedule time to do the important but not urgent things. Find some time in the calendar. It doesn't always have to be the first thing in the morning. Maybe it's something that's on one day of the week, or maybe it's later on in the day. I'll talk a little bit about that, about some strategies for personal projects and stuff like that in a little bit. But you want to find some time to work on these projects. Things that are important and can really help with long-term goals and development and stuff. Let's talk about topic anchoring. So, have you ever been in a meeting with someone and they like to go down rabbit holes, like me? I like to go down rabbit holes. You don't believe me? You can take a look at my hidden job market video. That was a 200-hour rabbit hole, which has had great. It's had a great impact and influence on how I teach job search. It was still a 200-hour rabbit hole. So regardless or not of what you call it, it went way off topic. But that was a fun rabbit hole. Anyway, so if you've ever been in a conversation and stuff, you like to go down rabbit holes and that, and you have problems staying on topic. Well, I'm going to give you a tool. It's called topic anchoring. And this is where, if you're in a meeting and you have a tendency to go off center, write down the name of the topic, even declare what the name of the topic is. And then just keep your pen, touching the topic, on the page in front of you. And the idea here is that this is a focus thing to say, hey, this thing is what I'm supposed to be talking about, and this is what I'm going to continue to talk about. Now, when you go off topic, because quite frankly, people that don't have this issue go off topic occasionally, but if you go off topic, then a really good strategy is called the parking lot. And that's where you just, write down what the item was, and then return to the topic at hand. And if you keep going to that same topic, circle it. Maybe it's something you actually should address if you keep going there, because it might be connected, and that's why you keep going there. So just bear that in mind, right? So it's okay if you go down that rabbit hole. In fact, you might even say that. You might go, okay, we've gone down a rabbit hole. Let's dig ourselves back out and return to the topic at hand, right? Because it's important to get done what is the purpose of your meeting and so forth. So if one of the things that you have a tendency to do is jump from topic to topic all over the place, like me, then it's a good idea to have topic anchoring as a strategy. I actually do this for the PowerPoints as well. I take a look at the PowerPoints as I'm doing them, and they act as a way to keep me on topic and focused. Otherwise, I would go down rabbit holes a lot. So similar to anchoring, you can also use the same or similar method to explore, and this is called mind mapping. And this is where you can take a look at one item. In fact, you could probably do this while doing anchoring, is you can draw out different items that are connected with the topic at hand. So I put down here a coffee cart project because I got the opportunity to work on one last year. So I'm kind of, and that project's still going on, so it's still kind of in my head. So I did one on the coffee cart project, and there's different elements linked with the coffee cart project. This is similar to like the work breakdown structure. Actually, you could use this to help generate the sections for your work breakdown structure. So you can, you're going to do a coffee cart. So you're going to want a menu, you're going to want marketing, target market, location, setup costs, equipment, all that sort of stuff. Right. So you're going to want to know all of those different things. So, it's not a bad idea to, okay, so if I need equipment, so equipment, well, what kind of equipment do I need? So I might need equipment for making food or making the coffee. And then I might want equipment for the cash register. I might want equipment for, so it just comes, you branch out from a centralized topic. And again, this is another tool for helping to brainstorm or to organize the different elements of a project as well. It's also a great way to, keep your attention on a particular topic as well, and in the sense that you can see how it all relates. Now we'll get over to emotion management. And if you've seen my interview workshop, you'll know that I talk about things like thought records and stuff, because they're very useful tools for thinking about situations and such. But in here, I'm gonna do this one a little bit more based on retention. So, the idea here is for you to examine a situation. What are your thoughts about it? How do you feel about it? How has that caused you to behave? And then what are some alternative thoughts? So what could it be beyond the thoughts that I've initially put into this? So let me give you an example. So, I'm in a meeting and my manager gave me some pretty critical feedback in front of the team, in front of colleagues, and the first thing that passes through my mind is, oh, I failed. It's in front of people. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent. Oh, this is what's running through my mind. Emotionally, I feel embarrassed. I'm frustrated. Funny way of putting it. Frustrated. I got anxiety. About the whole situation. And that caused me, maybe I'm a little bit more quiet in the meeting. I'm ruminating on what was said. I don't think the feedback was accurate or whatever. And then I avoid, asking questions and stuff later because I'm irritated about it. But some alternative thoughts to that is, well, it's normal for people to get feedback. That's what helps us grow. Others get feedback too. That's not about humiliation. So maybe I wasn't the only one who got feedback in the group, right? Sure, I want the positive stuff, but the negative stuff is also, really important, right? And I can use that feedback, and next time I'll be a little bit more prepared and more confident, and maybe something I needed to take more ownership of, or just bear in mind for next time. So even just going through this exercise, thinking, okay, well, I got some negative feedback, I failed, but what's the reality about this situation? So this is a good tool, especially if you feel hurt in a workplace, to, or even if you've gone for an interview and you sit there and go, oh, they didn't pick me. Why didn't they pick me? Well, only one person can get a job. And to be honest with you, being on both sides of that table, it's really hard to pick a candidate one over another, because sometimes you've got really good candidates and you have to pick the best one. And that can be hard. That can be really hard. Anyway, I digress. Now let's talk about energy management. So the thing about our energy is that it declines over time. So, in the morning, we might have, great energy. Sometimes we might have spikes of good energy throughout the day, but generally speaking, it declines over the course of a day. But there's also something called temptation. And maybe you started off, with well-meaning expectations for the day, like I did. I said I wasn't going to have any sweets or sugary drinks. I've already failed. And, so that's my intention, right? But then there's the temptation to, maybe go to Tim Hortons, or maybe the temptation to quit on a project, or the temptation to procrastinate. The list goes on. And that increases over the course of a day, right? So our willpower, according to Dan Airy, he's a behavioral economist, our willpower diminishes the more we resist temptation. This means that even if we resist temptation, we are paying a price. So bearing this in mind, there's a few things that you can think about in terms of how to structure things like workflows and what kind of tasks you do at specific parts of the day. And this is referred to as the three-segment split. And the 3-segment split is just basically, splitting your time up into 3 different segments throughout the day. So, as you have high energy and there's low risk of quitting or giving in, these are times you want to schedule projects that are more difficult. So projects we don't like, tasks we don't like. Ever hear the expression, you swallow a bullfrog first thing in the morning, the rest of your day will be great? Similar concept, not quite the same thing, but similar concept. The idea here is that things in the morning that are difficult, it's going to be easier for us to do, less likely for us to quit on these type of things. Then from noon to 5, these are projects and stuff that require, maybe a moderate amount of energy, but again, still less temptation to quit. You can also back this up with things like accountability. So maybe do it with someone or have someone that does it with you, so you're less likely to quit because there's that accountability there. And then, this is where I do a lot of my fun projects is in the 5 to 10 p.m. range. And these are things that are, they require low energy and low temptation to quit, meaning they're things that are fun. Those are the important but not urgent things from our priority matrix. So these are personal projects that can help move things forward. They're the things that we find fun. I do a lot of study and stuff around this period. I have a tendency to work on PowerPoints. We'll talk about my PowerPoint addiction later. But so if you're taking a look at this, right, when you are faced with a project, think about it this way. Is this something that's really hard for you? Are you more likely to quit with it? Or is this something that you can do with other people? Or is this something that you find really fun and energizing? So based on that, think about what time of the day would be best to work on this project. Now, of course, there's things like deadlines and stuff where you have to move things around. There's times that I've had to work on really difficult projects in the evening, whether I've liked it or not, right? But, overall, if you have some flexibility on your schedule, try to move things into a format like this so that it's a little easier to get things done and that you can get more things done over a longer period. Well, that is it for my presentation. And just to go over some of the tools that we talked about today, we went over SMART goals, we went over work breakdown structure, we went over the quad method for note-taking, we talked about power lists, we went over visual schedules and time blocking, we talked about the priority matrix, we went over anchoring and the parking lot, we went over mind mapping, thought records, and the 3-split schedule method. So if you enjoyed any of these tools, you can put your favorite tool in the chat. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, and we will catch you next time.